MS Now's Pentagon reporter Priya Sridhar is back with us. I also want to bring in John Brennan, former CIA director and MS Now senior national security and intelligence analyst, along with former New York Congressman Max Rose, senior advisor for Vote Vets. Priya, you were on this story before almost anyone else. The USS Lincoln has shared videos from sailors on board celebrating their strength and their resilience. What do you know about those new posts and what is really happening on board that ship?
Yeah, Alicia, it seems like the military is on somewhat of a PR campaign right now, and it really aligns with the messaging that we've seen from many of the political appointees who are in charge of the military, like the chief spokesperson for the Pentagon and Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth and acting Secretary of the Navy Hung Cao, who have tried to blame all of this on the shameful media who are apparently trying to characterize these service members and their families as victims. And Sean Parnell even tried to point to his own deployment. And we've seen a lot of that sort of rhetoric about how, you know, the military is obviously a place where you're not going to see luxurious conditions. These are what deployments are like. But I can tell you, Alicia, that this deployment was not standard at all. 208 continuous days at sea with no port calls is not normal. Aircraft carriers typically stop every 30 to 45 days. And in addition to that, you're seeing what's usually a 6 to 7 month deployment for these aircraft carriers being extended indefinitely 9 to 12 months long. So that is really what caused all of these issues when it comes to exhaustion and morale with the service members on the ship. Their supply shortages were real. The Navy leaders have acknowledged it themselves. They say this was a result of Iranian missiles striking the Navy's Fifth Fleet headquarters in Bahrain, and they had to pivot to another military base on an island that was 2,200 miles away from the Gulf of Oman, where this aircraft carrier sits. So none of this was made up. This was all very real. And we're seeing these leaders scramble to try to cover it up, essentially.
Let's talk about that scramble. Director Brennan, the top military official overseeing the war, Admiral Brad Cooper, visited the aircraft carrier over the weekend. He wrote an op-ed released Sunday in the Wall Street Journal saying that many of the issues are, quote, old news, and crew members were, quote, tired, but they continue to fire on all cylinders. Families of those sailors dispute that, with one woman saying enlisting in the Navy was a dream for her son, but that dream has now been shattered. Quote, he just can't wait to be done, she says, adding Donald Trump needs to be ashamed of himself. Director Brennan, what do you make of the conflict between what you have military commanders saying and what we are hearing from the sailors and their family members?
Well, I think Admiral Cooper owes it to the servicemen and women who are aboard the carriers and the other ships to try to remedy the situation out there, and not just with nice words. Yes, war can be tough. It can be grueling. At the same time, there's an obligation on the part of those in charge to make sure that the best available conditions and supplies are available. And as has been mentioned, I mean, it shows the real lack of planning that went into this conflict. The fact that the major supply depot in the Middle East, the U.S. Sixth Fleet headquarters in Bahrain, was virtually destroyed at the beginning of this conflict, and they haven't been able to really replace it or refurbish it. It just demonstrates that they were not expecting the type of response from Iran. And so again, also it just underscores just how awful and, unfortunate this conflict has been. But again, I think Admiral Cooper and others really owe it to the men and women aboard these vessels to do everything possible to make the conditions better, and not just with a lot of nice words publicly.
Yeah, I mean, Max, I keep thinking about something that Amy McGrath said to me last week, which is like, members of the armed services don't need to be coddled, but they do need strong leadership. And she is one of the folks who's calling out Secretary Hegseth and his leadership in all of this. Senator Kelly, who was himself a retired naval officer, had a response to what we've heard from the president about the possibility that this deployment was, quote, not long enough. Take a listen.
The president's comments are just uncalled for. I mean, he's a guy that has spent a good portion of his adult life sitting on gold toilets and doesn't know what hardship is and doesn't understand our service members. In fact, it's insulting what he said, that the deployment wasn't long enough. He doesn't know sacrifice.
Do you agree?
Of course. I mean, but this should come as no surprise that Donald Trump and his administration are doing this. Of course, Trump referred to the fallen as suckers and losers. We have known how he looks at service members behind closed doors for many years. But this speaks to something larger as well about the administration's strategy and priorities. They got money. They have money for the ballrooms. They have money for him to have massive security as he decides to golf all around the country at his various properties. But what they didn't do is plan for a protracted conflict. That's why this is happening on the Lincoln. They said this was going to be a 4 to 6 week conflict. In fact, they said it was going to be so short, they didn't have to go to Congress for it. They didn't have to plan. They put a bunch of generals in who are sycophants because they fired all those who want to talk independently. They decided to engage in culture war as a department, focusing on issues of diversity, focusing on issues of learning history, all the while forgetting about actually planning for a protracted conflict before they get into it. So no wonder what we're seeing on the Lincoln is actually occurring. But it's part of a much larger story about how they did not plan for this conflict and how it is reckless and unconstitutional.
Priya, can you just pick up on the point that the congressman is making here about misplaced priorities? What do we know about the president's desire to change U.S. aircraft carriers, not in function, but in form?
Yeah, this was a fascinating exclusive from the Washington Post that essentially saying that President Trump wants to move the multi-story command and control tower that's typically in the back of an aircraft carrier back to the middle of the aircraft carrier like we saw in World War II. And what most experts would tell you is that it's actually safer and more efficient for that multi-story command and control tower to be at the back of the ship because it allows the aircraft to be closer to the catapult where they launch and take off from and also to land. In addition to that, he's saying that he wants to replace the electromagnetic catapult that launches the aircraft into the air with a steam-powered catapult like they were using back in World War II. Not only are these changes going to cost billions of dollars, they're also going to delay when these 4 Ford-class aircraft carriers are going to be deployable. And I think at a time when you're seeing the 11 aircraft carriers that we already have in the U.S. Navy fleet be stretched and stretched thin, I think a lot of people in the Navy are wondering, why are we prioritizing aesthetic over safety and efficiency right now?
Yeah, I mean, Director Brennan, I don't know how you go into that meeting with the president or his emissaries and not walk out simply saying, like, you got to be kidding me. This is the priority.
That's exactly right. I think it's criminal, the fact that members of the cabinet actually listened to Donald Trump musing about, the redesign of aircraft carriers. He has no experience whatsoever, no expertise. All of the things that he is doing and saying just demonstrates the extent of his incompetence and recklessness, as the former congressman said. And so therefore, again, what he is doing to our men and women, I think it should worry every single member of the U.S. military and their families in terms of the callousness and the recklessness with which he pursues his commander-in-chief role. And so, again, I think we still have a long way to go in this administration with more problems ahead.
Priya, the USS George Washington is going to relieve the USS Lincoln. Talk to us about the decision to send the Washington. Why is that its own controversy?
Yeah, that's right, Alicia. So a lot of the family members of the sailors on the Lincoln confronted Navy leadership at that town hall in person in San Diego on August 6th. And they asked, listen, why can't we send the George Washington to the Middle East? It will obviously get there faster because its home port is actually in Japan. And the acting secretary of the Navy at the time said, no, of course, we cannot send that aircraft carrier because we need to leave it in Japan. The United States has always had an aircraft carrier in Japan since 1973. And the reason for that is because of all the different adversaries that the United States has in that 7th Fleet area of operations. We're talking China, we're talking North Korea, and also Russia. And so if you move that aircraft carrier to the Middle East, it would take the United States 17 days to get an aircraft carrier from mainland United States over to that part of the world. So that means some place like China would have a 17-day head start. And that's why Navy leaders were focused on sending the USS Theodore Roosevelt, which is home ported in San Diego, to relieve the Lincoln. But I think, again, they're scrambling right now to solve this huge publicity nightmare, which is the conditions and the morale and the exhaustion and the dangerousness that we're seeing with the Lincoln.
Max, you have Democrats on the Senate Armed Services Committee. They sent a letter to Defense Secretary Hegseth demanding answers about the troubling reports of poor conditions on the Lincoln. I'm curious sort of what oversight you think is actually effective there, especially since, if I'm understanding you correctly, part of what you're saying is The ship is emblematic of a bigger problem and challenge here, which is he has entered a conflict that he did not have clear stated goals on. He was not able to communicate them to the American people, much less to these service members. He now doesn't have a plan for exit. And so in some ways, contending with the question of the ship is almost the best, an immediate way to articulate to people sort of the fecklessness of the administration in a larger sense.
Absolutely. It's part of a larger narrative. And that is exactly the story that Senate Democrats and House Democrats, for that matter, should be telling. They can tell that story through letters. They can tell that story, obviously, through their own remarks. But the questions that they ask are the most important tool that they have in oversight of these, whether it is the generals, senior military leaders, or the senior leaders of the administration that will go before them. And the more specific the questions they ask, the better. How did it get to the point where the Lincoln did not have enough food? How did it get to the point? Did you plan for that? But also, did you plan for the military bases throughout the region to get bombed? Did you prepare in advance for them to have the proper defenses? The specificity of their questions will be their greatest strength.